I would like to start off by acknowledging that I'm hosting this webinar from the lands of the Gadigal people. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands upon which you are all working today, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples participating in this webinar. I pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. It's also exciting to note that we are currently in NAIDOC 2020, where we're here to acknowledge, celebrate, and embrace the rich history of Australia. For those of you who couldn't attend the last two webinars, I'll give you a quick introduction of myself. My name's Cherisha and I work for Societal Consulting. We've been engaged by the Disability Strategy team to assist with the innovation program. We're essentially helping to build a strong data and evidentiary base for each and every project that's part of this program. Very briefly, in terms of the agenda today, we have two exciting projects that are presenting for about 15 minutes each. We've slotted in 5 minutes of question and answers that are scheduled after each presentation. Given the large audience today, I would request if all questions could be input into the chat section, and then I will then facilitate and convey these to the speakers during those relevant question areas. One last piece of admin before we kick off. As you may have all noticed, this webinar is being recorded. We are hoping to share this with those who could not make it today, and we'll be sending the link for this after this meeting. So alrighty, let's kick it off. It is my pleasure to first off by start introducing Auntie Ruth Sims, OAM, who is a core member of the DISC project to deliver the Welcome to Country.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the traditional custodians of the land in which we are now meeting. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Eora Nation, of which I am part of. My dad comes from there, and the Yuin Nation, of where my mum lived. I'd like to also welcome everyone to our great nation. And when I start on this, please forgive me, because we have so much beauty, and we as Aboriginal people are the oldest surviving people in the world. We have nurtured our country and looked after it for thousands and thousands of years. And today we need to look after it so that we can still have the beauty that surrounds us. If we look at our rivers and our seas and our mountains and our beautiful flora, anywhere you go, and I'm sure wherever the people are who are watching this video, your own place, your own town has beauty to offer as well. I'd like to recognise that beauty because we have nurtured that and looked after that. It is our place, our responsibility to see that our environment and our beauty is so that it can go on for thousands of years. Across the sea, we now call Australia home and be very proud to do so. I will leave it at that because once I start talking about our people and all Australians to share this great country, because we have very, very important and wonderful things that we can hear from the principal of East Narra Public School and the counter principal, Andrew Leslie. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the presentation.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Auntie Ruth. I'll now hand it over to the DISC project to start with their presentation.
Look, thank you very much, everyone. Look, my name's Christy Goldthorpe. I'm principal at Narra East. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. Today we'll be co-presenting. There'll be myself, Andrew Leslie, the coordinator of our Maya, and also Charlotte and Tony, who are our partners with the University of New South Wales and the Ingham Institute, and they are supporting us with the evaluation part of this project. The Disability Innovation Through Schools and Community, just known as DISC, has been a project that has started about 4 or 5 years ago. If we move to the next slide, it started through Premier and Cabinet, and Premier and Cabinet came to community and talked about service delivery reform and how we can get better outcomes for students. It was also linked to improving attendance at Narra East School. So that was how the project started. And since by being able to apply for this Disability Innovation Grant through the Department of Education, we have included and we've expanded the project to our local schools, the schools in our COS, plus our neighbouring preschools. We recognise that early identification and the early years are absolutely critical, improving long-term outcomes for children. So together with our partnering schools and early intervention organisations, we're coming together to expand the project. So if we go to the next slide, we talk about what are the key aims of our project. And one of our key aims of the project was obviously improving school attendance, but it was more about also that service delivery reform, doing things differently, and improving the health and well-being of children and their families in the Nowra region. So that part was the most critical part to our project. And as you can imagine, it's quite large and quite big. So if we turn to the next slide, so historically we had been working very closely with Premier and Cabinet and bringing on organisations who are willing to support families in the area. One of the prerequisites was there was actually no funding available for this particular project, and there was a lot of in-kind initial startup. So organisations came together, and lots of consultation was discussed with community over a long period of time about what would this wellbeing hub look like and where would it be placed. The school was able to provide a space, which was at the time it was a spare classroom, a small office area, and a storeroom, and with support from people in our community, some renovations were taking place. So these were a lot of our partners that were involved, and as you can see, there is a large number of partners. And if we go to the next slide, we look at the services, some key services that those partners were offering. And on that next slide, we've got our paediatricians, GPs, we've got dentists, psychology, speech, OT, legal services, Centrelink. We have the Learning for Life scholarships through the Smith family. We have asthma clinics, physiotherapy, sort of, you name it, whatever a family comes into this space and is asking for, we do our best to try and get that service in. And with all the services, of course, they're not all in the hub at the same time, but some are rostered on over a timetable during the week. And then also people come in and out of the service on a needs basis. But there is a very strong commitment that they've all got a partnership agreement and a service delivery agreement with the school. And they've also, they're working with children checks. That's all done and screened before that they go on. But it's really important that to note that when we look at the next slide to see the breakdown of services, paediatrics is probably, and OT, speech and psychology, probably have the largest impact on our students and the most positive impact. Paediatrics is huge. It started off as the intent of having half a day a month. It's now grown to having 3 paediatricians who we are up to 1 or 2 days a week. But it's still only, paediatrics is still only about 7 to 10% of what we actually do here. So even though it has probably one of the largest impacts on students, it's just a small part of what we do. On the next slide, you'll actually see sort of the breakdown, sort of month by month, of the services that the children are accessing from our COS, not just at Nowra East, but our neighbouring schools that you saw on the first page. And over the time, since we've started the Disability Innovation Grant, we've had over 700 appointments that students have been able to come in and access services. I'm going to hand over to Andrew because I know we're moving through this at quite a fast pace, but I'll hand over to Andrew.
Thanks, Christy. I too would like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on Aboriginal land and broadcasting out to lots of other Aboriginal land, pay my respects to elders past, present, future, and acknowledge Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people who are attending the webinar today. So we're going to run through this fairly quickly. So there's just a few slides here that Cherry will move through to show you an idea of what the space looks like. So you can click through those, Cherry. This next one. So one of the things we have actually tried to focus on is attendance, and with this you'll see that each of the schools in our COS, our benchmark data was average of 84% attendance. It's dipped down and it's moved across the COS since we've had intervention to about 88.14%. At the bottom of that, you'll also see that our attendance for children who've been accessing services in June was 71%, but through involvement in our Maya, it's moved up to 88%.
And you'll see that
on the next slide. So you can see that we've had a 17% on average improvement across children accessing our services. So we're very pleased with that. The next slide, you'll see that we've had a slow and gradual improvement in Aboriginal families and children attending our services from 48% in June up to 64%. So, we're really pleased with that because that's one of our KPIs and benchmarks. The next slide is a breakdown of PBL incident short and long suspension data. What you'll see here, the first column in yellow is PBL incidents. The next column is short suspension. And the third column, and in fact it's great, there's some with no column, is long suspension. You'll see that it dips around, but what appears to be happening is that the PBL data is, PBL incidents are reducing and the number of short suspensions is reducing and long suspensions. The next slide will give you an example of where we think the trajectory is headed. So our Maya was at Now East before we had the DISC program. You'll see in the top triangle on the left, it's PBL theory. You should aim to have 5% as Tier 3 children, 10% as Tier 2, and 85% as Tier 3.
on average.
On average, Now East, when we commenced, had 30%, 13, and 57. And roughly 1 year on, we'd reduce that Tier 3 children to 17, Tier 2, 11, and Tier 3, 72%. So we're moving in a really positive direction, and the initial data suggests that we will get a similar profile across the COS, probably in about a year's time, but obviously this project is only 6 months, so we won't see that. The next slide, I've dug down deep into the data. Student A is a male, he's non-Aboriginal. The first column is attendance. The second column is PBL. The third column is short suspensions. The next column is long suspension. You'll see that this child's attendance dipped, but is moving in a really, so the linear projection is that he'll be at or above what is required to be at. And you can see that the PBL projection, linear projection, is that he's moving down to 0. Student B, this is a female Indigenous person. You'll see that their attendance has improved from 43% up to 95%, and you'll also see a similar reduction in PBL and suspensions. Student C, this child had really good attendance, but they had lots of behaviour problems. So they've had quite a lot of significant behaviour incidents. Once again, they've all been involved in paediatrics, psychology, occupational therapy, lots of other therapies, and this student's moving in a similar trajectory.
And of course, when students are receiving support in our Maya, there's that real consultation between the therapist or the doctor or the person that's supporting the child in the hub, but also that information is shared with the parent's permission with the class teacher, and then those interventions can be supported within the class. IEPs are developed, and you can really see a noticeable change for that student. So therefore, that's where we're seeing really clear indications with our PBL data and our short and long suspensions that's having such a positive impact on the student.
And student D, the last one before I hand over to Charlotte, we're seeing really good progress with this female Aboriginal girl. Her benchmark attendance was 38. She's bumped up and down, but she's, as of last month, was 87%. But you can see that she's had lots of PBL, instance 14. She's had a couple of short suspensions, but she's really moved down, and she's out of that tier 3 and she's down into tier 1. We also make sure that all of our children have wraparound IEPs, they have MAPA plans in place, and they have individual learning plans in place. I'm going to hand over to Charlotte now. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, and thank you, Auntie Ruth, for your lovely welcome to country. So my name is Charlotte, and I'm one of the researchers helping out with this project, along with my colleague Tony, who's also present somewhere, and I'll just speak to some of the data that we've collected. Trey, if you wouldn't mind going 2 slides across. Perfect. So the first thing we did is we did some school-wide surveys, and these were key to establish a baseline across the schools and to identify where the benefits of the hub were flowing onto the school as a whole, not just for the students accessing our Maya. So surveys were completed by 3 year groups across all 6 schools in the community of schools. And these surveys collected data on things like student demographics, psychological adjustment, quality of life, and wellbeing in school. Onto the next slide. We also did surveys specifically with the students and families accessing our Maya. And these were completed at 3 time points by both teachers and parents. And these similarly collected data on things like student demographics, quality of life, wellbeing, and also looked at parental distress and self-efficacy, as well as family adjustment. And the intention here was to see how quality of life and student health and wellbeing changed over the course of an individual student accessing care. And so, as I said, these will be done at baseline in 6 months because we only have baseline scores right now. The most interesting thing we can kind of look at is comparing the cohort of children accessing our Maya against the school-wide sample. And so if we look at this graph here, this is an indication of quality of life. So here, higher scores indicate better quality of life, and the red dotted line indicates the national norm. So scores falling below that line indicate low quality of life. If we first look at the green bars, this is indicative of the school-wide sample. And we can see on the whole that students are experiencing quite low quality of life across the schools. If we then look specifically at the blue bars, we can see that students accessing our Maya are particularly at risk. So they're experiencing particularly low quality of life. So on the whole, this reflects what we know in that it's quite a disadvantaged demographic. And so students across the schools are having low quality of life, and that the cohort of students accessing our Maya are particularly disadvantaged. We might skip the next slide, Cherry, just because it shows a very similar thing. Looking at another measure, the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, this is just for students accessing our Maya, and it can give us an indication of the presentations that we're seeing at the hub. And so what we can see from this graph is that students accessing our Maya are experiencing symptoms associated with ADHD at a particularly high rate. So if we look at the middle column for hyperactivity, and they're also experiencing symptoms associated with depression and anxiety. So that's on the far left column, the emotional problems. And that gives us an indication of the kind of presentations we're seeing at the hub. On to the next slide. Thank you. And so we've also done some interviews with different stakeholders involved with the hub. to give us some sort of qualitative feedback about how things are going. So we did this with lots of people, school principals, teachers, school counsellors, health professionals involved with the hub, social service providers, as well as Aboriginal education consultation group members. And on the whole, the feedback was really overwhelmingly positive. People really love the service and feel like it's going to make a real impact in the community. And sort of three main areas of feedback emerged. And so the first one was the hub's role in integrating education and health systems. And so because of the health service located on school grounds, it's able to facilitate this dialogue and collaboration between education and health professionals. And this was previously mentioned by Andrew and Christy, but there's really strong follow-up procedures and open lines of communications between teachers and the professionals working at the hub. And this ensures that families don't fall through the cracks. And it's also really important for teachers because previously, they'd refer a family on to a paediatrician. They wouldn't know if the family made it to the paediatrician. They wouldn't get any feedback. But through having access to the hub, they're able to have that communication with the health professionals supporting their students. And so they feel much more able to be actively involved in supporting their students. Equally, it's associated with some challenges in working between these two very highly regulated sectors of education and health. And so just to kind of manage this concern, the hub staff is in ongoing communication with New South Wales Health, just to make sure that their regulations and standards are being met. On to the next slide, please, Cherry. Thank you very much. The next kind of point of feedback was the success of our Maya in removing barriers to accessing care. And so the hub provides families with free services on school grounds. So, parents don't have to make transport arrangements to make it to appointments. And it's providing services in a place that's very convenient and familiar. Who have poor health literacy and feel, unable to navigate the complexities of the health system, having a hub coordinator involved with the service who's really knowledgeable and able to proactively guide and support families through the process of accessing care was something that people felt really, really positively about and was one of the main strengths of the service. And finally, people provided feedback about how successful the hub had been in ensuring the community's buy-in and in gaining the trust of families. And so people commented time and time again about how they felt that the service was really safe, it was welcoming, it was much less intimidating than going to a doctor's office, and particularly that strong relationships between teachers and parents were a real asset in gaining the trust of families. So because teachers could say, hey, this is a service that we have on school grounds, they could walk families down to the hub, get them a cup of tea, it was much less intimidating for families and much less scary. And our Maya has also been really effective in engaging the school's Aboriginal communities. So as Andrew and Christy mentioned, lots of students who are accessing the hub identify as Aboriginal. And it's also got the support of the local Aboriginal education consultation group. As some suggestions that were made to further establish the cultural safety of the service, these were to display the Aboriginal flag, to display the Our Maya cultural name, and to employ an Aboriginal staff member. And since these suggestions were received a few months ago, all of this feedback has been actioned, which is really wonderful. So in the interest of time, I think I'll wrap it up there, but looking forward to hearing everyone's questions.
Beautiful. I think we are a little bit short on time. So I think if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we may circulate them. We'll hand them to the speakers and send something through via email, just so we have a chance for the second presentation too, if that's all right. Look, thanks so much, Disc, for your presentation. Really interesting, lovely to see all the data you've collected so far. I'll hand it over now to Student Voice to go ahead with their presentation.
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Student Voice in Education Planning Pilot Project. We would like to also begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting today and pay our respect to their elders past and present. And also we would like to extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islands people here and also non-Aboriginal people here today. So I am one of the 6 presenters today, and my name is Mugi. I'm a parent of an amazing young guy with a disability who attends our local primary school. So slide 3, table of contents. Yeah, that's this slide. This slide is what we are going to cover today. Now, project overview. I will introduce a very brief overview of the project. The Student Voice project proposes a novel collaborative approach based on discussions with parents, educators, and students to embed student voice in learning for children and young people with disabilities. The importance of embedding the voice of students into their learning plans is a well-established principle in disability research and practice. However, there are no clear pathways to do so. The Student Voice program aims to provide such a pathway to directly include children and young people with disabilities in their planning and education to enable them to reach positive learning and life outcomes. This aim is also consistent with the intention of New South Wales Department of Education to amplify student voice, participation, and leadership for all students. So now let's look at who is involved in this project. There are so many people involved in this pilot. We had 3 school partners: Bankstown South Infant School, Chalmers Road School, and Punchbowl Public School, and 42 educators, 80 students with disabilities, and 103 parents. And the program was created by parents of now young adults with disabilities, Silvana Mamek and Dr. Annick Jansen. It's also co-designed and facilitated by a team of parents of young children with disabilities from Australia and New Zealand. Our research partners are Dr. Tim Moore from Centre for Community Health, Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and Associate Professor Peggy Kern from University of Melbourne. I'm just mindful of the time limit, so if you want more detailed information, please see presentation slides when they become available after the webinar. Okay, so now let's see what we did. The pilot project ran across 3 phases. In phase 1, we delivered 4 weekly sessions to 10 groups from 3 schools for parents and educators together in each session. All the sessions were delivered online through Zoom, and it was conducted during the COVID-19 pandemic. In phase 2, the students, educators, and parents worked together implementing the pilot and achieving goals and integrating the student voice. In phase 3, parents and educators joined together for the final session and shared their accomplishment, learning journey, and next steps. Also, it's the time for evaluation of the pilot outcomes and final reports. So now I am going to hand it over to Silvana Mamek, co-creator of the Student Voice program and CEO of Plumtree Children's Services.
Thank you, Moggy. Why is this project addressing student voice in planning and education? Firstly, there has been a profound change in public awareness of disability. The New South Wales Disability Inclusion Act and the introduction of the NDIS have increased understanding and expectations, leading to people with disability being more widely recognised for their contributions in society. Secondly, the prevalence of disability in our schools has been changing. The overall number of students with a disability could increase from approximately 110,000 in 2017 to reach 200,000 by 2027. Also, the New South Wales Parliamentary Inquiry into Students with Disability found that improvements must be made to improve quality and access to education. Thirdly, building an adequate evidence base is one of the biggest challenges we face in reforming the education system to enable children and young people with disability to achieve good outcomes. But there is little consensus on how to measure their learning outcomes and a lack of research that compares the results of children with similar needs across different settings. This makes it difficult to identify and scale approaches that work best. Fourthly, despite evidence that meaningful inclusion of the student, the parent, and the teacher in the IEP is beneficial for learning and developmental outcomes, the CIDA National Education Survey found 17.8% of students with disability did not have an IEP in place. 9.1% of families didn't know if an IEP was in place, and 36.4% of families were not involved in the development of their child's IEP. Barriers to meaningful student voice include assumptions that children with disabilities can't express themselves, insufficient opportunities for families and educators to work in partnership to amplify student voice, not knowing how to find and use student strengths, persistent beliefs that professionals are the experts, and insufficient time and skills for collaborative, respectful relationships. These and other factors have led us to the current situation where student voice is not systematically included in their planning and learning. However, there is growing national and international interest in changing this. The Department of Education has recognised that student voice is essential and they are invested in supporting this for all children. This project looked at how student voice can be included in planning and learning. I'd like to welcome my colleague, Dr. egl.ac.nz next. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvana. So first, our deepest thanks to the parents who co-designed this framework. They facilitated the pilot based on their lived experience and guided other parents to effectively engage with educators to amplify their children's voices. What's innovative about this 4-step student voice framework shown here? Firstly, it is strengths-based. Parents first reflect on their child's strengths. The Pictability tool we designed with families in 2015, funded by Premier and Cabinet, was tested by over 1,000 families. Pictability won Innovation Awards because it first focuses on child strengths and on the family long-term positive vision before prioritizing the specific goals to work on. 2, student well-being. Participants identified the factors unique to each student. This model was developed by Martin Seligman, positive psychology founder from the University of Pennsylvania, who inspired the implementation of positive education in Australian schools. 3, while it is obvious that partnerships between parents and educators are essential, we found few effective mechanisms to promote it. The pilot carved a dedicated space out of the busy lives of parents and teachers to enable new strengths-based collaboration patterns to emerge on 2 levels. Firstly, embed well-being into strategies that parents and educators use to support each student to achieve goals. And secondly, communicate about goal progress so that home could learn school and vice versa in real time, not at the end of the year. The words strengths-based approach and student well-being have almost become buzzword in education, but we found that schools had no simple and effective tools to implement them. Student Voice proposed a solution that to create goals that are based on students' unique strengths and support students to achieve them using their individual well-being factors. Number 4, how do we assess student voice contribution? This is what the next slide shows. So to assess student voice impact, we collected a large amount of data, and more detail about our measures will be available through the executive summary that DOE has circulated. We're presenting the following measures today. On the left side of the screen is the goal achievement uptake. The integration of student strengths into long and short-term goals through Pictability and other tools. The integration of students' well-being factors into strategies to support the students achieve their IEP or PLASP short-term goals, and the total achievement rate. Top left is our up-to-date results showing the variability by teachers of goals achieved, goes between 26.2% to 85%. What difference does it make on goal achievement that teachers integrate strengths and well-being? A lot. The teachers who supported their teachers achieved the most goals were the ones who included strength and well-being of each student, as well as the authentic goals chosen by parents themselves. The graph on the right side of the screen shows that the sense of well-being from parents and educators increased significantly between session 1 to 4 and was generally maintained through to session 5. It is by continuing to answer such questions that we will get closer to ensuring students make meaningful contributions to the individual IEP or PLASP plans and prepare them to lead their personalized planning. So next slide will show an overview of our findings to date and our next steps. Bottom left is the gaps that we've realized. There are gaps at the moment in strengths-based approach, how they're implemented in student voice and education planning and partnerships between educators and family. Our next step is to complete the data analysis because we aim to build a robust evidence base. We're so glad that we have amazing project champions. We have early adopters and champions among the schools and teachers, and this will be very helpful in scaling up processes and to deliver student voice professional learning. We note that there's additional training needed from educators. Some of them have asked for it, capture and integrate student voice, foster parent engagement, strengths and well-being factors. Finally, we are so excited that there's so much interest in new ways to plan. Parents and educators embrace new ways of integrating student voice in planning. And I'm very happy to report that we have some educators starting training as speakability facilitators before the end of November. And they will be joined by others who for next year who have already expressed interest for next year. And that's me.
Thank you. Thank you, Anik. It's Silvana again. For the next 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes of our presentation, I'd like to host a short Q&A. It will just be 5 minutes. I'd like to welcome Sophie, Natalie and Judy, who are representatives from our 3 school partners. And I'd like to invite each of you now to briefly describe your settings. Sophie, would you describe your school setting?
Hi everyone, so I'm Sophie. I'm the relieving AP Special Education at Punchbowl Public School. So we're a preschool to year 6 school. We have, in our preschool, we have 4 early intervention classes for kids with disability and 4 mainstream classes. And we also have 2 autism classes for K to 6. And altogether we've got over 600 children across the whole school.
Welcome, Sophie. Natalie, would you briefly describe your school setting?
Hi everyone, I'm a relieving assistant principal at Chalmers Road School. We're a school for specific purpose, so all our students have moderate or severe intellectual disability along with other diagnoses. We currently have 69 students ranging from kindergarten to year 12 in 11 classes. In each class we have a teacher's and a teacher's aide, and there's 3 sections of the school with the infants, primary and high school.
Thank you, Natalie. Welcome, Judy.
Hi everyone. I'm from Bankstown South Infant School, and we are a school catered from children from kindergarten to year 2. We also have a preschool, 1 preschool and 1 unit early intervention. We have several students with additional needs that attend the mainstream classes with support funding. In early intervention, there are 2 support model. We have a support class and a resource class program. So our principal, Kimberly Cullis, is very supportive of our inclusion and integration of all students in our school program. And we have 4 teachers and my SLSO who also take part in this student voice program.
Thank you all. I've got 3 short questions. Sophie, could you tell us what worked with the student voice program in your school?
So I think one of the main reasons why it worked was that for the parents, it was very non-threatening and user-friendly. We often, as mentioned earlier, we often have parents who, we ask them what the goals are and they don't know how to answer, or it's a bit overwhelming for them. So using the Pictability tool helped the parents to feel empowered to drive the development of the IEP goals.
Thank you. Natalie, how about for your school? Oh, Natalie from Chalmers Road. What worked for the student voice in your voice program in your school?
So direct contact with the parents in the initial phase of the program, and phone calls, emailing the parents about the program, and all the feedback from the parents was that they really liked the idea of the program and were wanting to take part, and were really empowered by giving their children a voice in their learning.
Thank you. And Judy, how about in your school? What worked in terms of the program participation?
Yeah, the Student Voice program has helped the teachers to work collaboratively with their parents in working on the goals that actually matter to the child. And we also learned to have to recognise the signature strength and the wellbeing factors of all those students, and also in ourselves as well. So I think also it did make a lot of difference with how the student progressed, and also how much parent involvement with the program. Also, I have to mention about the positive psychology in this program has helped parents and educators to have hope and look for the good in their child and the student, which makes a big impact in overall learning of our students.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Like all of the pilots, I'm sure there were challenges. Sophie, can you name a challenge in participating in the pilot?
Well, the most obvious challenge was COVID-19. Having to do the sessions via Zoom rather than face-to-face was challenging for a lot of our parents who didn't have access to the technology or didn't understand how to use the technology. So if we had been able to do face-to-face sessions, I think that would have definitely eliminated that challenge.
Thank you. Natalie, a challenge in your school setting?
Have a great day.
We found a lot of parents the time commitment was a real struggle for them. They were fine with the Zoom, but it was more the time commitment, and parents were dropping out from, that was the main concern. And then even getting the feedback from the parents through the sessions and meeting up what they talked about in the session to bringing that to the school, what wasn't happening. That was our biggest problem.
Thank you, Natalie. Judy, in your school, what was a challenge?
I agree with both Sophie and Natalie regarding about the technology, the COVID, and how you engage parents. I think with having some of them doing online at night, I think it can be really exhausting. And I think by that time, most of the parents are really just trying to put their child to having a little nap and sleep time. So that was one of the big the challenges that we have, but also with us, because we started the program in April, we didn't start right at the beginning, so we already had the goals set up for all our kids, so it was starting the whole cycle again. And then with more increased parent involvement that we need to start working on and learning about all the different strengths, about the signature strength and the wellbeing factors that all comes into. It's a learning process. So if we started at the beginning, it would be really great for us.
Thank you. And our final section, so please keep your answers brief so that we can finish on time. What did you learn and or next steps? So Sophie.
So the main thing I learned is that parents, I knew this already, but when children go from one teacher to the next one, the goals will change depending on what the teacher's beliefs are or that sort of thing. The parents are the constant. So I learned that by empowering parents from this early stage and early intervention, they can then drive the conversations around goals even when the teachers change each year.
Thank you. Natalie.
We learned that the parents overall were pretty happy with the goal setting process we have here at Chalmers Road, which does involve parents. And I guess because it's in practice here that might have impacted the motivation in the goal setting and that, and also, as Judy mentioned, the time frame. But one thing we would like to look at is actually not just the parents involved in setting the goals, but having the students directly involved, even attending the meetings, the PLSP meeting, goal setting meetings with parents would be fabulous. And that's something we'll definitely try and get in practice.
Thank you, Natalie. And finally, Judy, just before we close our session, your next steps and what you learned.
Well, I'm saying with Sophie, I really enjoy the program, and I think My next step is I'm going to want to continue, want to learn more about the feasibility program and to implement that in early intervention at Bankstown. So one of the ones who put my hand up to enroll for the next course. Yeah.
Thank you very much to our partners, also to our research partners and to the New South Wales DOE for being a part of this innovation pilot. And back over to Societal.
Thanks so much. Look, I'll make it very brief. I know we're running over time. Thanks to both projects for their really great and informative presentations. I know it takes a lot of effort, to present in this virtual environment. So thanks for your efforts. It's really great. We'll be sharing the recording and these presentations after this meeting. Feel free to have another look and let us know if you have any comments, queries, or feedback. It's always welcome. Last point is that we have the 4th webinar, which has been locked in for the 26th of November in a couple of weeks. So please RSVP and stay tuned for more details. Finally, thanks to everyone who attended today's webinar. We really appreciate it, and we are loving the sharing atmosphere and all the learnings that are coming across from these programs so far. Have a great Tuesday, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.